To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to a non-Thursday edition of the Backyard Gardens podcast, and we hope everybody's having an absolutely fantastic day. Batavia's stressed because these are shorter episodes, so she's got to get everything in quick.
I get like 1.5 more episodes to figure out the timing of this.
But look, today we have, I think this is a very good question. And one of the reasons why we wanted to get this out as soon as possible to everybody. And the question comes from the Backyard Gardens Community Garden Facebook group, which you're more than welcome to join. It's free of charge, no issues there. And this is from Carol. And it's a real simple and it's a very straightforward question. My question is, when should I start my fall garden? That's a great question. There it is.
I'm getting closer, yeah.
You're getting closer, yeah. And I forgot to pause, so I'm sorry.
Hey, Carol.
There we go.
It folds in. It's all about timing here.
The listeners are like, if you hit that bell one more time, I'm going to scream. So yeah, it's it's a very good question. We definitely talked about it in a previous episode, but we wanted to kind of revisit it in a directed conversation about it. One of the purposes of these shorter episodes is because these questions are, I think, and we both thought were very strong, but you can't just sit here and talk about when to start your fall garden for an hour. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of difficult. So we wanted to break it up into smaller chunks, more digestible and easily referenced as well. So
ends up happening if you spend an hour on it, you kind of shortchange some of the topics.
Yeah.
Right. Some of these important points, and then if you spend an hour on each of these important points, I'd be like just hitting a bell for the last 20 minutes,
Yeah. And the other thing too is, knowing us, we spend an hour on it, we'll end up going off topic hard. Mm-hmm. So this is a way for us to stay look, let's be honest. It's super directed, like, don't mess around. Let's get to it. And speaking of which, let's do that. But before we do, I do want to say you can become a subscriber through Apple, Patreon. You can get some seeds and a limited time, a jar of honey from my farm here, all through the links below, and get your fall seeds. We have some spring seeds left over, which are still fall seeds, and some summer seeds as well. So help yourself to those. And also the planter app. The link is below. You've heard us talk about it before. It's an excellent app, and this is exactly what we're talking about. We use it for this right here. So check that out and get yourself that discount. Okay. So I think we should break this down into categories because it's not a simple answer like everything in the garden. It is not a simple answer. And I just got, Batavia just sent me a question because yesterday we were recording and David went to go fishing. And David's my son. He hooked the fish, but it broke his line. So, okay. Yeah, he came back. He was so mad. I thought he was going to hit me in the face with his fishing pole. But we wanted to break it down because not only is it different for each area, but it's different for what kind of seeds you start. And there's even some stuff you can start later. So we definitely want to cover all that. So as far as the basics of seed starting, which is traditional, put the seed in the pot, grow it, transplant it. Right?
When we talk about seed starting, we are talking about something that's not inside of your garden, right?
Right. And we're going to go into direct sowing and everything else too. But as far as like seed starting, and if you refer to the last episode where we talked about the order in which you should do it, you should start those long grow season vegetables 16 weeks before your first frost date, roughly. 16 to 12 weeks before your last frost date. So that gives it 8 weeks of planting, like growing in the pot, and then roughly 8 weeks in the ground till your first frost. And then you get another couple weeks after that, up to a month, sometimes even more, of it maturing in the ground and getting off and running, because the goal is you want these plants to be in the ground and mature before the frost comes, which makes them much more resilient, is the word I've been looking for about 15 episodes now, to the cold weather.
Hey, Siri girl, how many weeks between now and my first frost, November 1st?
Yeah, that's not working.
She didn't have anything scheduled for November 1st. No, I mean, I think that's a really good breakdown. And the time that you're spending indoors for those things you're starting, there's no additional tacking on time, right? That didn't happen until you kind of get outside when you're trying to calculate the time period for growth. So yeah, that's the reason why July, early August is when we wanted to make sure we got this information out there. And, despite being in the throes of the summer garden, we know that it's sometimes difficult to tear yourself away from that. Like, this is the time, like when you start your fall garden, like now, like, in a word, now.
I was just counting. It is 17 weeks and I've already started some of my stuff. So for me. So that being said, we realize the time of, when this episode is releasing, and some people are like, oh my gosh, it's too late. It is not too late, because there's quite a few crops that you can still start seeds for that don't need that much time, right? My favorite to start that doesn't need a lot is a rutabaga seed. You only want to keep that in the pot for about a month. So you want to get that in the ground before the last frost, but you want to get it a little bit mature and a little bit of roots on it so that it can kind of hit the ground running. So just think about that. Anything like that, like turnips, you could do. Your greens, they can go later. They don't need that full 16-week. What do you think a 16-week seed would be? Let's narrow that down.
I think for sure cabbage.
Yeah,
16
cabbage.
Weeks.
Brussels sprouts.
Yeah, Brussels sprouts. Yeah, I think, and again, kind of goes back to piggybacking on the previous chats along this line. These are things that are going to produce a head. I do want to comment. I know you've had success with, is it turnips and rutabagas where you've started them in seed pots and then transplanted them?
Yep.
I've not tried it. Generally speaking, those things are recommended for direct sowing, but this is when you play around with a lot of concepts here, right?
Yeah, you get creative. And man, I've done all of my rutabagas that way. I've not done them, and I get rutabagas from them. So I have not had an issue with that at all. And I'm probably going to continue doing that. Turnips, it's not as important. That can fall into the next category and be planted later. But, for the most part, rutabagas are a good one. Spinach is another good one that doesn't need to be 16 weeks. So in my mind, the 16-week category really falls into cabbages, broccolis, Brussels sprouts, which could technically be cabbages. And that's really about it, man. I think, if you're growing short day onions, you get those in about 12 weeks.
You could do cauliflower, broccoli and cauliflower are on the shorter end, but there's not a lot of weeks to play around with.
No, there's not. I would rather, go ahead.
Before we get to direct sowing, we talk about, not often, but we talk about kind of the seed to harvest time. And, you'll read the description of a seed package and, it talks about 90 days, 100 days, 75 days, all of that, and I say it again. This is probably one of the only things that I can count on you to agree with me on. That is for one of like four. Like in our life, right?
Yeah.
That is based on ideal conditions, right? So ideal conditions for that particular crop. I believe for fall as a whole, it's not ideal. Like we're planting in a non-ideal time frame as it relates to what's generally and commonly communicated for kind of seed to harvest time.
I don't think there's an ideal condition anywhere, really, any time of the year.
I think that there probably is a small pocket
Yeah.
of gardeners across the world that for even not all crops, but just for many crops are really in that ideal circumstance. And so kind of put that in the back of your mind. So I am starting many multiples of things. Right. You know, knowing that I may not plant it all, but I want to make sure that I get that crop harvested. Yeah. Right. Get that crop in the ground, get that crop harvested. So I have about 6 collard green plants now that probably will produce unless some sickness takes on, or I found 2 cabbage butterflies inside my netting. Like, come on, you got to be kidding me. Where did you come from?
So rude.
And so that said, I still started some, Georgia collards from our seed shop because I want to make sure I have collards going into the fall and winter.
Yeah.
Right. And for broccoli, I don't really have room for more than 6 or 10 broccoli plants compared to everything else I want to grow. But I started 16 or 18. Now that's also a little bit with my challenge that I have starting brassicas. I know, cry me a river. But yeah, so time isn't on our side, but it doesn't mean that you can't have a kick butt fall garden.
Absolutely. And I mean, the one thing is, especially for the days of harvest here, is we're getting less sun. Mm-hmm. So you've got to factor that in. And usually it's considered adding about 7 to 14 days into the grow time. Yeah. That's what's typically listed in the publications. So, I mean, you can see that, yes, maybe you have missed your window at this point for the 16-week window. But when you start getting into your 12 weeks, I mean, there's a lot of things you can still start and that you can be getting ready to start. Now, you can always get a transplant and put it in. Mm-hmm. You do not want to put a transplant in 16 weeks before your first frost date. That's something to remember. I mean, this is strictly for starting these long-term seeds and then going into 12 weeks. And I usually step it down. And one thing I will do, like especially for broccoli, is I'll start a tray of broccoli earlier than I want, and then I'll start another tray or half a tray or something on the schedule that I originally planned, so that I can see which one will do better, because the seeds are plentiful. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, you may, even with a couple of weeks, which could be critical, you may be able to play around with that depending on where you are as a gardener. So I'm going to have spaces where I'm going to be direct sowing some of the things as well that I'm even starting indoors. Again, I'm going to see which one plays out the best, because I can, without fear of complete disaster, plants burning up and plants, bolting. I feel pretty good about if I can get it to germinate, if it's, I can keep that soil moist and get that seed to germinate, then I'll have plants that are in place. I don't have to worry about the hardening off period, because there's still going to be a hardening off period for those things that we're starting 16 weeks out, right? So I save myself a little bit of time with that if I have the conditions to direct sow them in place. So again, it's you gotta do it to figure it out.
Yeah, and I mean, you brought up direct sowing, and it's great because it's really our next topic, which is direct sowing. Which fall is a great time, and this when I do cool seasons are when I do most of my direct sowing. And there's a long list of plants that can be direct sowed, and there's also a side list of plants that can be direct sowed and also be pre-started or seed started. So if I go down the list in my head, which is just off the cuff here, of plants that can be both direct sowed and seed started, I would start with lettuce, rutabagas, kohlrabi, turnips, spinach, and am I missing something? You could do onions. I prefer to seed start my onions, but onions are another good one.
You could do onions 2 ways. You can do onions for the purpose of, planting the bulb. If you have onions that are designed for overwintering, if you're in colder climates like mine, right, and just regular old, whatever your day onion is, if you're in a climate like Young Ben, and either way, you could grow just green onions, right? Mm-hmm. I've been meaning to talk to you about this. I have a bunch of seeds from kind of the 2024 season for onions. I ended up getting like a second package sent to me, and I'm inclined to just do like a kind of scattered sowing. Like I'll get green onions. They won't produce bulbs, but start out with next year's onion plants with fresh onion seeds, just not to have to battle that whole germination situation when you oftentimes run into with 2-year-old onions.
Yeah, onions are a very hard crop to talk about in a public manner because you've got 3 different styles is what you would say, like short day, intermediate day, and long day onions, and they all need to be started at different times of the year. It's very difficult in a abbreviated manner to sit down and talk about something like that because like I plant my onions for next year in the fall. You'll plant yours in the spring. So yeah, there is always that option to start green onions. It's a tough one, and you've got to understand what onions to grow as well. Yeah. That's the key to all of this is like, what are the onions that you need to be growing? So, and it's because they get triggered by the amount of light that they're receiving triggers them into bulbing. So if you're too far north and you're growing a short day onion, they're going to bulb before it's warm enough and possibly kill the plant off. So onions are a very difficult one, but yeah, I don't see why you couldn't. I mean, I think you would be better off buying an actual green onion seed. And to be honest, I grew green onions and I just started from cuttings from the grocery store. That's the only one I've ever grown from the grocery store that I liked. So, I mean, that's always an option as well. And they get huge, man. Huge. It's crazy.
Yeah, you're talking like a foot tall, really. If you
I'm talking 3-4 feet tall and about 3 inches around. I mean, they were giant.
Oh, wow.
And I don't eat them enough to warrant putting them in the garden.
Yeah, that's, there are a couple of ideas around like kind of drying it for onion powder. It would be green, of course. So there's some things that you could do. I'm just looking at it like space seeds, because otherwise I'm not going to use them 2 years from now, 3 years from now. But anywho, this is actually a good time when it comes to direct sowing, things that you enjoy. If you have some older seeds, sow those things heavily, right? Sow them densely, sow them thickly. You want to make sure that you're, of course, using those seeds, but you don't want to take many chances with needing to come back in and re-sow. Remember, time isn't on our side, right?
So direct sowing seeds, I got to steer us back on track because the clock's a ticking here.
You don't have to do anything. I'm fully capable of refocusing my energy.
Not me. I go crazy.
Where are we at now? Direct sowing? Still?
Direct sowing, like only direct sowing would be, obviously radishes is one. Cilantro is a really good one to direct sow. Just because it's actually a lot more cold hardy than one would think. Carrots are another one. A lot of people can get carrots in the ground and get them. Parsnips are another one that need to be, and that's actually one of the earliest ones. I'm going to be starting mine in about a week. So I'm
going to warn you all, temper your expectations when it comes to things like carrots. I won't say parsnips because I've only grown them a couple of years. The reason why I say temper your expectations for carrots, the time to germinate is counting. That's the clock we're on. And carrots are probably one that is real. The most critical to make sure that you're keeping the soil damp for that germination.
Daily waterings.
Yeah, definitely. And then and you could try the board trick, sowing them heavily, putting a board over them and then checking daily until you see germination and then removing the board. But the production of carrots, again, we're in the hot weather, so the way that those green tops grow is a little bit slower than they would if it was, kind of starting in the cool. So your carrots are growing at a different rate in the fall than they would, if you're in the spring. So I've done some sowing of carrots and come up with some itty bitty things. But I'm still going to be sowing carrots in August. Like that's a part of my plan.
So I've had carrots that I've direct sowed for the fall season, and they germinated in 2 days. Whereas if I germinate them in the spring, 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks. And I think it's just the soil temperatures are right. But the problem is it gets so hot that it's just like you're constantly on top of them. So my goal has always been to get a harvest of carrots before, it gets too cold, and it's never occurred to me. I've never had that happen, but I can overwinter them and getting into like harvesting them in the spring, early spring sometimes. But that's always, it just depends on where you are. And you really, the trick is to look at the crop, the days to harvest is, even though neither one of us really agree with that day to harvest, it's still a guideline to go by. Worst case scenario, if it says 70 days, 100 days, do you have 100 days before you start getting really cold? Are you going to do frost protection, stuff like that? So, those are all things to consider. Kale is another one that you can direct sow quite easily. Mustard greens, collards, you can direct sow those. Chard, peas, beets. All of these you can direct sow all of them, and some of them are like beets are easy. I mean the seed's huge, so is chard. So all of that is an option. The key is just keeping the soil moist, which means leave your hose out, give it a 5-minute watering every day, maybe at first twice a day, morning and night, and just keep that soil nice and moist through the heat.
I'm going to share the story again as a lesson for me that I've learned and a warning for you all. The best space to plant in is going to be a space that's not obstructed by other things, other plants. Last September, it had to have been the first week of September, which would put me about 60 days before my average last frost. I direct sowed lettuce.
Which is 8 weeks.
60 days. Yeah. Okay. So you insist on counting by weeks. So I direct sowed them where some onions were growing that I had pulled up, and behind the onions were like 3 feet tall pepper plants lined up. It was in a space that was the furthest end from where the sun, furthest in from the east where the sun's rising. And by the time that sun got over, it took so long for them to germinate. When they germinated, they had maybe 7 or 8 true leaves once the frost came. So I had other spaces in my garden that would have been better off for me to direct sow some lettuce. 8 weeks is kind of, again, especially if it's a heading crop, that's a kind of short period from direct sowing to producing. But make sure you have an optimal growing space that you're planting in, whether it's transplanting or direct sowing. That's going to give you better results. And I know sometimes it isn't easy because we have a whole season of garden things that are already in the garden. But I'm going to be fortunate and I'll have actual clear beds to plant in for fall, which isn't always my story.
Yeah, I've been trying to have clear beds, as you know. So I've been working with that. Now, we've covered seed starting, direct sowing, and now let's say you've stumbled across this episode, or you've put it off, and next thing you know, you want to start a fall garden. There's still some things that you can plant late. Let's call it a month out. A month to 2 weeks out from your last frost. You're cutting it close. If you're at the month stage, then you absolutely can still put transplants in. You can go buy transplants and put them in. No harm, no foul there. You can still do some direct sowing, and you need to think about it at this point, though. Are you going to provide frost protection? Because if you are, then you've got a much greater window to plant. One of the things obviously is going to be radishes, and I said this in the last episode. I generally have a bed that has radishes, lettuces, and bok choy in it. Now, if you know me, you've listened to the show, you've watched Sandy Bottom Homestead on YouTube, you know that I'm typically monocrop, but this is one season in which I don't really monocrop a whole lot. And this is why, is because there's these plants don't take up a lot of space. You know, one row of lettuce can easily provide me weeks and weeks and weeks of salads. So I'm not really overly concerned about it. If I take 2 rows of radishes, but based on the spacing of radish seeds, I'll be tired of eating radishes before I get out of the 2 rows, typically speaking, and same with the bok choy. So I'll combine those, and I always say this is the bed that I'm going to put under frost protection. So you can still put those in the ground. You can get them growing. I don't harvest my lettuce the same in the spring as I do in the fall. So in the fall, I take the whole plant. Or in the spring, I take the whole plant. In the fall, I do the cut and come again method. And so I still, that's the one way I can do it. So I can keep those lettuce plants in the ground in the fall for months almost. If I get them in at the right time and keep them cool, then I can just keep harvesting all around them. So you got to change your plan a little bit from what you normally do. And I know it's hard to kind of get out of that comfort zone. You know what I mean? We get in a routine and we like to stay there.
Yeah, I think this could be a significant difference in our climates. I was looking back and I was getting kind of sad because I went back to see what date I direct sowed that winter spinach. Remember from last year, and it was the last week of October, and I scrolled further, and my average first frost date is November the 1st, and it was about right last year. So last week of October, I direct sow spinach. We get our first frost for the season. We get some colder weather. We get some snow even. I'm looking at a month later, 4 weeks later, I could see the spinach seedlings basically in the ground, a couple of true leaves. They actually grew a little bit more, but nothing worth like harvesting, right? So that 4-week period for me was too cold for it really because there is freezing, thawing happening too. I want to be very clear in that. And so that for me, I know that it's more like 8 weeks. Right. That looks more like if I have plans to harvest that spinach this growing year. That wasn't my plan for last year. So again, if you would have planted spinach, direct sow spinach the last week of October, you would have, for Christmas, you would have had spinach salad.
Right.
Not necessarily, the thing in my area. Again, I'm getting down to 32 degrees Fahrenheit, multiple days after my last frost date. First frost date.
I'm glad you brought up the spinach because that's a good one too. You could, if you put a frost protection over that, it will continue to grow. The key, man, I smell another episode brewing here, is leaving the frost protection on during the day long enough to keep it warm, to warm it up faster, and it will continue to grow. It's just, one thing we have to realize is everybody's like, oh, it's all about light, but it's all about temperature as well. Temperature is a very big part of it. And if you can keep it warm enough, and remember, if it's 32 degrees, your spinach plants are going to look at you and say, hey, hold my seltzer water. I'm good to go. You know what I mean? Like, this ain't nothing. I don't even need a blanket. But the reason why we want to put that frost protection on it is so that we can ramp up that growth a little bit faster because the soil stays more active. It works the fertilizers. It feeds the plants. The plants are growing more active during those warmer periods. So it's just something to consider and to factor in your decision if you want to move forward in this endeavor, or if you've already had a fall garden and you want to try and improve it more this year. These are good techniques to do. And I think that it really does, if you grow the right plants, and we stress this all the time and we'll never stop stressing it. If you grow the right plants and you use the right methods, you will see that you will be able to harvest more in times when you didn't think was possible. And I think that's really important to remember.
And look at it like some R&D. You're doing some research here too.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah. You can read about it all day long. And we said this in the last episode. We can sit here and talk about it all day long. But the fact of the matter is your climate's different than our climate, than your neighbor's climate, than the person down the street. So you'll learn over time, and you'll know how to handle it better, and make things grow. So these are all things to do, but you can see 16 weeks out start, and then we've given you a timeline to go through. We've given you other plants that you can start later, direct sowing, and then even late plantings. And I got to say, sometimes my late plantings actually do better than my earlier plantings. And that's a note that I need to remember for myself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, making a reference to the timing of that, right? And the weather that you were experiencing in that late planting. Because again, for you, this is where, I still can't say 100% with 100% certainty that you said I could have a kick butt fall garden. I feel like it was spring, but maybe it was fall. Maybe it was both.
I said both.
But if I get my timing right, yeah, man, I'm going to be running circles around my summer garden with my fall plantings, right?
Yeah.
But it just takes some, work to get that timing right. And that's the reason why these conversations are important. This is the reason why actually trying multiple methods, multiple vegetables, multiple crops, it's all important. So I was telling before you end, I was telling young B and how excited these conversations have gotten me about fall gardening.
Yeah. She's jazzed, everybody.
Yeah.
This is year 3 too, just so you know.
It's not year 3.
It is.
Is it?
Think back, it is. And just for the record, I'm in coastal North Carolina, and Batavia is in the Chicagoland area. So that gives you a reference of where we are for our seed starting. Sorry we didn't say it before, but you're here, so there you go. Become a subscriber, buy some seeds, get the Planter app, and remember, we're going to learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Well, we hope you enjoyed the show, and thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by checking out our seed shop below. We have all kinds of seeds available for you, and we're going to be adding new seeds shortly, so check that out. Get yourself some seeds. It's free shipping, over $35 orders. So go ahead, get a full garden. What are you waiting for? Order your seeds and stock up. Or you can become a subscriber. You can either be an Apple subscriber or a patron, and that will help support the show. You'll get one free episode every month, an extra episode, that is. So we definitely would love to see you over there and become part of our crew. Join the Backyard Gardens community garden in Facebook. That's free. Go ahead, join that, and join the community where all the listeners get together and they can help each other out with their trials and tribulations and just show off their gardens. There's not a better way to do it. And if you're curious about what's going on in our gardens, you can check out our individual YouTube channels. So I'm at Sandy Bottom Homestead, and Batavia is at Be Better Garden. You can check that out and see how each of us are growing and what we talk about on those, because a lot of times we will coincide with the podcast and help add information in that maybe we didn't get out in the show, or we feel that's pertinent at a certain time of year. So check that out and enjoy seeing our gardens and what we do in them. And we have an Amazon store which has all the products that we use and recommend in our gardens, and it helps support our show. And we also add to this list periodically, so be sure to check it out periodically to see if there's anything that you need for your garden. Everything that you do, including a like and a subscribe and even a review, will help us learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.